Hi there. Within Fairbot automation, there isn't a mechanism that allows you to simply specify a piece of logic that might be used in some sort of decision-making process. For example, if you're familiar with spreadsheets, which I'm sure the vast majority of you are, you'll be familiar with an if statement, which allows you to check a particular condition, and if that condition is true, the spreadsheet can be configured to go off and do another calculation. But if it's not true, it can do a completely different calculation. That sort of thing is what you have to simulate within Fairbot automation. There isn't a command or a condition that you can simply specify, do this logic. Instead, you have to build up that logic with separate rules and essentially simulate that logic into its own constituent parts. So that's what I'm going to show you how to do today. So if I open up the strategy editor, I've actually already got a basic strategy set up. Now, depending on what it is you're trying to do, you'll quite often find that there's a number of ways of going about doing it. I'm not going to explore all of those different ways for this particular basic strategy I'm going to introduce you to, but the important point to take from this video is the process that you have to go through, in that you have to build it up into its component parts. So what I'm going to do is, we're going to have a strategy, and I'm not saying this is in any way, shape or form a winning strategy. It's really just so I can use it as a demonstration. What I'm going to do is back the favorite, but only if the favorite is over 3 in odds. If it's not over 3, I'm going to back the second favorite, but only if the favorite hasn't already been backed and the second favorite's odds are above 4. And you'll probably guess where I'm going with this. If neither the first or the second favorite has been backed, I want to back the third favorite, but only if their odds are above 5. So if we go into this first rule here, well, first of all, we'll need to add in the condition that specifies the odds limit, which in this case will be the selection fixed odds. We're looking at the by position back odds number 1, which will give us the favorite, and we want that to be greater than 3. In addition to that, what we're going to do is to separate these rules so that they execute at slightly different times, one after the other. So I'm going to kick this one off and tell it to start 8 seconds before the scheduled off time. But I'm also going to get it to stop 6 seconds before the scheduled off time. So in other words, what we're doing here is I'm giving this rule a 2-second window to check the price of the favorite. And if the favorite is above 3, place the bet. Now the next rule is going to be much the same, so I can simply copy and paste it, go back in and edit that. Accordingly, so we have back the second favorite. Now in this case, we don't want this rule to run at the same time as the first rule. We want the first rule to execute, because it's whether that rule is executed or not determines whether this rule is executed or not. So the previous one went from 8 to 6, so let's change that from 5 to 3. Again, a 2-second window. The action is going to be the same, but we need to specify the second favorite, so we'll keep it with by position back odds, choose the second favorite, everything else is the same. But if we go to the conditions, we need to modify this so that we're looking at the second favorite, and that needs to be greater than 4. But we also need to add in a check on the rule that we've just created earlier. In other words, the rule that backs the favorite. And we need that to be equal to 0. In other words, that rule hasn't fired, i.e. a bet hasn't been placed on the favorite. Okay, and that's all good to go. And you won't be surprised to learn that we simply paste in the other one, and it's much the same thing really. Change that to back third favorite. and the previous one went from 5 to 3, so we're going to have this go 2 to 0. The action is going to be the same, except it needs to act upon the third favourite. All the settings are the same. The conditions, same thing, change that to third favourite, and that needs to be greater than 5. We also need to check both the previous rules. So the rule of number executions for backing the favourite should be equal to 0, and in addition to that, we want to specify back the second favourite should also be equal to 0. So this rule here is going to check not only the odds of the third favourite, but it's also going to check that there's no bet being placed on the favourite or the second favourite, and it simply does that by checking whether the corresponding rules have fired or not. Now you could, theoretically, rather than doing number of executions of whatever the rules are, you could just check the current state of the favourite. Trouble with that is the price on the favourite and the second favourite may have moved to be different, i.e. may have crossed over the condition crossover point, 3 odds or 4. But that's essentially it. So as you can see there, our if statement has to be built up into little blocks. And as I said earlier, there are quite often a number of ways of achieving the same ends depending on what it is that you're trying to do. I'm not going to show you them all. What I'm really just showing you is the type of thinking you need to go through to actually implement what it is you're trying to do. For example, it was necessary in this case to have these rules activated at separate times because they're interdependent, whereas the logic behind the variable green up strategy that I've shown you in the past, all of those rules execute at the same time, or they have the same window to execute. And whether they're executed or not is configured by the conditions that I've specified. And those conditions are independent of each other from rule to rule. So all of those rules can be active at the same time, but only one of them will actually fire. Okay, so that's the type of thing that you need to think about when you're creating some sort of logic decision-making process within your automation. You need to configure that in its own constituent parts because there isn't a mechanism similar to an if statement in a spreadsheet. Okay, guys, I'll speak to you later. Thank you.